All right. Welcome. Thanks for being with us. I am fortunate to be sitting here with the crypto dad. I call him chairman, former CFTC chairman, Christopher Giancarlo. So the afternoon, we're going to go over dollars, stable coins, and currency, and what crypto's role is in that discussion. It's important on a range of topics. This session, we're going to talk about digital dollars. And Chairman Giancarlo has been very involved in something called the Digital Dollar Project. So we're gonna talk about what that is, and then we'll dig into what does it mean to have a digital dollar. So let's start with Digital Dollar Project.
Yeah, so the Digital Dollar Project is a nonprofit, nonpartisan, non-governmentally funded, we're self-funded, think tank. And it's focused really on, so I founded it when I left the commission in 2019. And we have a broad-based advisory board. We publish papers. We do conferences. We're focused on three very simple but very important questions. One, how do we future-proof the dollar for the coming digital world? Or what I should say is world of digital networks of value. How do we preserve the dollar's reserve currency status? And really, maybe most importantly, how do we preserve the dollar's embodiment of the values that have made the dollar the world's most aspirational currency? Values of free enterprise, values of free economic autonomy, and values of the appropriate balance between law enforcement and economic liberty. And how do we do all those things in a world that is increasingly becoming one where value will move along rails, some of which are centralized by governments, some of which are centralized by corporates, some of which are highly decentralized? How do we do all those things in a dollar context? And that's the work of the Digital Dollar Project.
And so with the Digital Dollar Project, they're doing these deep dives on why does this matter, how can it look, where does the value come from? Maybe just to pull on that thread, why is it important that we care that the US dollar is strong? I mean, the answers here are obvious, but I think you've thought about it from a technology perspective, from a values and philosophical perspective. Why do we care that the dollar is strong?
So I'm not ashamed to say that I believe the dollar and its reserve currency status has been a net good, not just for the United States, but for the world. I don't think the last generation of globalization and global trade and global economic growth would have happened without the US dollar as the world's standard of value. We think about all the innovation that's come about in the last 30, 40 years from the internet and so on, almost all of that has been financed with the US dollar. And with the US dollar comes not just economic strength, but comes a set of values. You know, entrepreneurs building things with dollars don't need to ask their government for permission. And the dollar doesn't come with the requirement, you know what, we have too much financial technology innovation. We want you to innovate in life sciences or some other innovation area. The dollar has been a tool of freedom. The dollar has been a tool of economic growth. The dollar has been a tool of global trade. And I think it's been a net good for the world. And I think that those values are worth preserving as we go into a new century where value will increasingly move on digital networks of value.
And I'm a data person, and when you look at stablecoins at least, and that's the rest of this afternoon, 280 billion or so of stablecoin value out there, 90%, maybe 99% is US dollar based. And that's not an accident. That's what the world wants to trade in. That's what they want to transact in. But not stable coins are central bank digital currencies. I've said digital dollar. I think most of this audience knows, but what's the distinction?
Okay.
What's a CBDC versus a stable coin?
So the Digital Dollar Project, Ryne, takes no view on what is an optimal form of digital dollars. Our view ranges across tokenized deposits operated by banking institutions, stable coins operated by financial technology companies, and central bank digital currency. We are convinced that the future of value will be a kaleidoscope of digital networks of value, some of which, as I said, will be CBDC. You know, We cannot control whether there will be a dollar-based central bank digital currency or not, because countries whose currency is based on the dollar, like Bermuda, may choose to launch a CBDC. So the future is going to be all of the above. And what we need to make sure is anything that references the dollar adheres to the principles on which the dollar is based. So in a recent working paper published by the Digital Dollar Project in February, we looked at all forms of digital networks of money from these principles of future-proofing the dollar, preserving its reserve currency status, and most importantly, preserving the values. Now, to your question, what's the difference? Well, in the future, we are going to have a digital tokenized accounts, which will be dollar-based. We are going to have stable coins, which will be dollar-based. Some of those will be run by broad banks, some of those stable coins. Some of them will be run by narrow banks. And I believe we will very likely at some point have central bank digital currency. The difference is both technological, but ultimately it's about the issuer itself. You know, when there's a run on the bank and people go to the ATM machine, what they're really doing is converting the liability of a financial institution for the liability of Uncle Sam. The reason why we're even talking about CBDC is recognizing that in some cases society may want a liability of Uncle Sam as opposed to a liability of a banking institution or a technology company.
I just put a pin in that. 2 points. Chairman Giancarlo says we will have a CBDC. And he once said we will have Bitcoin futures and we will have Ethereum futures, and we now have them. So we have to listen to him when he says that. You talked about people wanting the liability across from Uncle Sam. Why does dollar have value? Why is it worth anything?
So let me say why I think there is a likelihood we may get a U.S. government-issued CBDC in the future.
Right.
Not a certainty. But we have seen...
Is that fiat? If
we've
it's US
seen
government
runs.
issued,
We've
yeah.
seen runs on banks. We've 3 of the 20 largest American banks bit the dust in the last 3 years. Mm-hmm. We've seen runs on stablecoins, dollar-based stablecoins. We may see a run on a dollar-based stablecoin or a bank tokenized deposit in the future. When that happens, if it's a Sunday afternoon, banking hours won't allow people to convert into a traditional bank liability. Mm-hmm. They'll seek the next best thing, which will be a sovereign issued digital instrument. If there's no US digital dollar, they may go to a digital euro. And that will result in de-dollarization. And that when that happens, I'd be surprised if our government doesn't turn around and say, you know what, we may need a sovereign digital currency. The reason why 90% of money is in bank deposits, I would argue, is because 10% remains in fiat.
Okay. People
will put their money in the bank because they know in a crisis they can go to fiat. The same relationship, it may turn out that stable coins actually need an actually digital form of sovereign money in order for people to feel comfortable to put their money in stable coins, dollar-based stable coins.
So if we accept that it's likely that we move towards a CBDC...
I don't know about likely, but it's certainly
possible. Possible. I'm with you on possible. I don't know how strong I am at likely, but possible. We will get a CBDC issued by the United States government. That's a possibility. Now we get into design choices. What are the critical design choices? And I've heard thoughts around privacy, transferability, censorship. What are the design choices, and how do we get them right?
Okay, so let's be clear about one thing. There is absolutely no inherent privacy in a commercially issued stablecoin. The Genius Act doesn't contain the word privacy. There is no requirement for privacy. There's no inherent privacy. In fact, we have seen that government is perfectly comfortable to tell social media companies what can be discussed. It's perfectly comfortable telling banks who can be banked and who cannot. And there's no reason to believe that government won't tell stablecoin companies at some point in the future, you know what, we really don't want people using your stablecoin to buy ammunition. So don't do it if you like your license, otherwise your license may be in jeopardy. The difference is, under the US Constitution, a government-issued instrument does enjoy Fourth Amendment privacy protections. Now, the jurisprudence around that will need to be developed, but I could easily make the argument that a dollar-based central bank digital currency will have more inherent privacy under our Constitution than will be a commercially issued a digital form of currency.
Interesting. And I want to go back to a point I think you made earlier. You're not necessarily advocating for or against, either yourself or through the Dollar Project, a CBDC, but you're teeing up why it might happen, and then now we want to think through the design choices. On privacy, what do you do in the structure of the network, of the coins, of the accounts to address some of the concerns that are out there?
Our view is the United States owns the dollar. We ought to take the same approach to licensing the dollar that McDonald's takes to their brand or Nike takes to their brand. You want to use the dollar as a reference point for your tokenized deposit. You want to use the dollar as a reference for your stable coin. You're a foreign country pegged to the dollar. You want to launch a CBDC based on the dollar, then it's our rules and our values. And one of the most important values must be privacy. Now, in our constitutional system, there's no absolute privacy. There's always a balance between privacy and law enforcement. That goes back to the notion that you have privacy behind your front door unless there's probable cause of law violation. We should approach it in the same way that highway law enforcement approaches that. That is, you're free to enter the highway, but if you give patterns of law breaking, then the highway law enforcement can stop you. Government should become nodes on blockchains and should be able to monitor transaction. And if there's a violation, then they have the right to interdict that conduct and invade your privacy. But short of that, anything that references the dollar should come with it a degree of privacy. And that would be in line with traditional American values as compared to central bank digital currencies promulgated by closed societies where there is no expectation of privacy.
And I've heard you on this point before. A currency has to represent the values of the society in which it operates, or it won't be accepted, or it is a tool of readjusting the values of that society.
And we as a nation should take the position that anything that references the dollar should reflect those values, including the values of privacy, of free enterprise, of free economic autonomy, free of government intervention on a just the government wants to tell us what to do basis.
Well, and let's pull on that point. I mean, you implied Circle, Tether, the large stablecoin issuers, they have an administrative hook to ultimately reach into their tokens, even on the secondary market, and do some things with those tokens. They can restrict them, block them. Would a CBDC, would it have to have that same administrative mode or God mode? Or do we rely on the enforcement authorities to go and take people to court, arrest people, or...
I don't think we have the infrastructure to either deploy or operate or even design a US dollar-based CBDC at this point in time. I think the United States is actually proceeding in the right way. The innovation should be done by the private sector.
Right.
I was talking to Bo Hines, by the way, we are so blessed at this point in time right now to have David Sachs and Bo Hines and others that are really steering innovation. Richie Torres, who was just here. We've got some great leadership steering this innovation.
Sure.
And the innovation should come, just as the early days of the internet came, by the private sector. But there still is a role for the public sector in setting core concepts, core value proposition, pure public policy concerns. And I think what we should be doing right now is making sure the private sector recognizes that the dollar is something precious. The dollar is something sacred. And with it comes a set of values that they should not be infringing upon.
And I think the market still expresses that preference. There is a clear demand for dollars at scale. We have trillions of dollars existing. If we look at policymakers and even Congress, there's the Genius and Stable Acts going through. I've not memorized them, I doubt you have, but those are not CBDC legislation.
Correct.
And to you, that reflects deferring to the private sector to let this continue to evolve.
Which is a traditional American way of doing things. In the United States, we regulate not first, but last, in comparison to, say, the EU. In the EU, European regulators will often say to innovators, hey, this is a cool new innovation, but you know what? Stop, hold off. We're going to write a set of rules, and once we put those rules in place, then go ahead with the innovation. And that And that's fine, and it enables Europe sometimes to set global standards. But the downside is the innovators then innovate to the rule. They innovate to solve a regulatory need, not a commercial need. In the United States, we're late to get to the regulation game, but by then, innovators have solved real-world problems, and by then, the regulators actually identify the public policy issues that regulation needs to address. So on balance, I like the American system better. Europe is racing ahead with a central bank digital currency. In my mind, go ahead. We'll get there later or not at all, but let's let the innovation come from the private sector where it belongs, and then let's identify what the public policy needs are, and then if we need to take more concrete public action, we can do it.
And no one will allege that the U.S. has moved too quickly on crypto regulation or
Although
CBDC
we're in a policy-led phase right now, like
Yes.
I've never seen before. It's pretty incredible.
I mean, we went through this season where there was enforcement across the board, every product you could imagine.
It was more than force, it was hostility.
We've emerged out of that season, and I think that is excellent. We've got a leadership group now at the administrative level and in Congress and at the regulators who want to get these things right. I think if we're looking now at not at crypto, but at dollars, digital dollars, CBDCs, and stablecoins, what do they need to get right? And I think a bit of it is just letting the market continue to evolve, but you also have the systemic risk considerations. What's the role of banks with dollars? And maybe on that piece, what are the bank regulators thinking?
Well, we need to get new leadership in at the bank regulators. That's been held up in Congress. We need to get those Senate approvals of Gould at the OCC and Mickey Bowman at the Fed. And then I think we can see some of the good policy making coming out of those regulators. I mean, with honesty, our banks have not been innovation leading. The corresponding banking network, the cost of moving money around the globe has been estimated to somewhere between 2 to 3% of the world's GDP just to move money around the globe. And yet we send photographs in a second, we send information in a second at no cost whatsoever. Stablecoins are going to change that dynamic. And banks, unfortunately, have not led the way. Maybe they will once this legislation goes forward. It is time that the cost of money movement is reduced closer to zero from where it is today.
I mean, the momentum is interestingly happening on the investment and private investment side. We heard yesterday from Hamilton Lane, Apollo, a handful of other asset managers and allocators. They're moving their vehicles on chain, and a major driving reason is cost. And when you start to look at digital dollars, whether it's stable coins or CBDCs, it's a lot cheaper to move money on chain than it is to move money through the banking system. I suspect next year or the year after, we're going to have panels with JP Morgan and Bank of America at this conference. But interesting to me, they're not here, the asset managers are.
Ryne, I predict to you now, within 5 years, virtually most of the money moving around the world, most of the dollars moving around the world will be moving on tokenized digital networks. And within 10 years, I predict to you that there won't be a securities offering, a debt offering, an equities offering of any significance that's not tokenized on chain. And those securities offerings that remain in an analog state will be like those bearer bonds in DTC's vault, the coupon clipping bonds that don't matter anymore. Non-tokenized, non-digitized securities will be like those old dusty photo albums, and securities on chain will be like the digital photos on your smartphone.
Well, let's wrap with this and bring it back to, I think we both see the entire securities world going on chain. What about the money? At what point am I buying my bonds, equities, stocks with digital dollars?
5 to 10 years.
5 to 10 years?
5 to 10 years.
Okay, so that's longer than I would have guessed.
Yeah. Well, because they both have to come together. We've got to get the securities on chain. We've got to get the dollars on chain.
Right.
The dollars are going to come on chain faster than the securities, but it's all going to, Ryne, in the year 2000, when we had something called the dot-com bomb, there was less than 350 million people using e-commerce. And when pets.com crashed, Time Magazine said, that's it, e-commerce is over with. Nobody's going to buy pet supplies online. Well, no, it wasn't that people didn't want to buy pet supplies online. They didn't want to do it using a dial-up modem,
right,
putting their credit card information in some dodgy website, and waiting 4 weeks for the pet supplies to arrive. It took the arrival of Amazon, it took the arrival of PayPal, it took the arrival of 3G, 4G, 5G technology, it took the arrival of Amazon delivery to make e-commerce a reality. Yet by 2010, 2 billion people were using e-commerce, and today the number is well over 6 billion people using e-commerce. That's a 20-year horizon to make e-commerce. I predict that digital networks of value won't take 20 years. We're talking a 10 to 15-year progression.
So we're going to keep building the infrastructure. Join me in thanking Chairman Crypto Dad. Good to see folks.